YouTube, and welcome to the weekly randomizer. As you can see, I've got myself a Zephyr Prime here. I know I kind of ragged on Zephyr a couple of randomizer episodes back, but I've been learning a little bit more about how the Warframe works just because I've been getting hold of the primes. For instance, the fact that the tornadoes essentially function like magnetized bubbles and let you spread damage to all the enemies caught within them. So that's useful stuff. But anyways, let's go ahead and take this sucker and randomize it up. Luckily, it looks like it's going to be a comparatively easy mission today, which is going to be pretty easily stomped with Mirage here, but especially because of this Amprex that I've rolled. So, in case you don't know, I think I've shoved more Forma into my Amprex than into any other weapon I own, just because I've run into some extremely powerful Amprex ribbons, 3 or 4 of them, I think, and I've traded or sold most of them away, but this is the most disgusting one I've come across of all time here. So the Amprex was one of the few beam weapons that kind of came away worse after its scrape with the beam weapon rework, but that said, you're still sitting on over 100% crit chance on a weapon that fires extremely quickly and has a very high status chance per second, and will arc to multiple enemies at once and just murder all of them. So the Amprex is still one of the most disgusting weapons in the game, even after the rework. And the biggest thing that they did with the alterations to beam weapons is they made them all more ammo efficient, which helps because the Amprex and all the other weapons out there, like the Ignis and whatnot, primarily just suffered from having terrible ammo economy. So now that you can keep the weapon in mission for 10 times longer without running out of ammo, it probably doesn't matter that the DPS on this has gotten reduced by maybe 50%. I remember back when, back before the rework, this was sitting on about a 180% crit chance with this ribbon here and the point strike sitting there. But we're still sitting on 116, so we're still able to burst out enemies extremely quickly. Now, as you can see here, point strike to get the critical chance above 100%. Vital sense and hammer shot for even more critical damage. We got base damage here. We've got more base damage here. Split chamber for multi-shot because that does give more multiplicative damage to your beam weapons. And then we've got high voltage malignant force just to convert all of the raw damage that this weapon puts out into corrosive damage, so that it shreds armor exceedingly quickly. You can also go for some raw radiation damage if that feels like that's going to be a better elemental type for your mission that you're running, or you can actually, if you really want to set up for a crowd control style weapon, you can just swap both of these mods out into blast and electric, actually, and that's also a respectable setup for the Amprex. There's a lot of different elemental combos you can run here, but raw corrosive just makes this sucker shred through armor like nobody's business. So yeah, that's always fantastic. Now, the other important thing that you might consider running on this weapon would be what's its bucket? Hunter munitions. If you really find that if your particular opinion on the Amprex is that it doesn't shred through armored targets or shred through shielded targets fast enough, but I've never struggled enough with raw DPS on the Amprex to feel like I needed to also cause it to be applying a bunch of slash procs. It's a cool effect, though. It is a cool effect, but the base damage on the weapon is not particularly high, so each individual slash damage is not going to tick for very much, and it's not that impressive overall, unless you're going against high armored targets, in which case it does become kind of impressive. But I find that the Amprex is just a beast of a weapon, and I'm not worried about it. I have nothing else to say about it. Amprex is just amazing. Now, we're wheeling that Amprex today with Mirage. Mirage is a Warframe that I do enjoy a lot. I don't know if I want to run her with adaptation today. I've been experimenting with that on some Warframes, and Mirage does have the Eclipse that lets you sometimes gain a huge pile of damage reduction. But again, like, the number one thing I say about adaptation is that you should always run it on a Warframe that is able to consistently take, well, 10 instances of damage, or 9 instances of damage. I guess it would be 10% resistance, 90%. You want to be fully stacked up to 90%, so you want to be able to make sure you can take a few hits. And Mirage, sometimes she can get away with that, sometimes she can't. It really depends on the map, if anything. just because Eclipse's ability to take in incoming damage is very highly map dependent. I think there are some real exceptions to the rule where Mirage can be extremely tanky. A great example is actually on the plains of Eidolon. If you're going to be farming, the Eidolon at nighttime, you're going to get only damage reduction out of Eclipse, which actually means that you can really get away with an extremely tanky Mirage build, and she will not die anytime soon out there because of having a constant 90, I forget what it is, 90% damage reduction off of Eclipse, whatever it is, yeah, 95% damage reduction off Eclipse to all incoming damage. That's pretty dang strong if you can keep that up. So other circumstances where you're certain that Eclipse is going to give damage reduction, then that sort of thing becomes good, but otherwise, not so much. And since I don't remember what map we're going to be on, I'm just going to go with Vitality for now. Anyways, enough chatting around. So what is this build for here? This build is not running any of Mirage's augments, as you can see. I'm not worried about any of that. I just want to have a balanced build here that's able to take advantage both of a reasonably sized Prism and of some min-maxed Eclipses and some decent duration, or decent abilities there, shall we say. So what I'm going with here is I'm going with high ability efficiency because we're going with a quick thinking build, and I want to make sure that I can not only channel Prism for a long time, but I can also not run out of energy while keeping up the upkeep on my other abilities. And that does mean that I'm going to have to spam a little bit more because of fleeting expertise here. A lot of times what you see people going with on Mirage is just streamline in terms of ability efficiency, and you'll see here, like this right here with the narrow-minded is more what you normally see people running on Mirage. You ignore the Prism, you ignore making Prism and the Ledger Domain useful at all, and you just go with setting up for a very long duration Eclipse and a very long duration Hollow Mirrors, and you go with the Hollow Malevolence there as well, so you can get lots of damage up on the doppelgangers. This is the sort of build that you see people going with, just because you can stack so much duration on Mirage if you really focus on that. But by the same token, I find that I genuinely like keeping Mirage's crowd control abilities up. It fits my playstyle a little bit better, just to be able to spam out a few of the blinding bubbles off of the Ledger Domain, or to be able to throw out the occasional Prism to clear the map, which is why this build is so incredibly balanced looking. Like I said, we have quick thinking, prime flow, and vitality, so tons of energy capacity to be able to spam things, and we've got quick thinking and vitality to keep alive for longer. Intensify, specifically because of the cap on Eclipse. As you can see here, without mods, Eclipse sits at 75% damage reduction, so it's one of those cases where you slap in a little bit of power strength just to hit the cap on the ability. And I've been running into a lot of Warframes you'll run into a lot of Warframes that are like that. In particular, I'm kind of upset that Nyx's rework went into essentially needing Intensify slapped in to hit the cap on Psychic Bolts as well, just because before then there really wasn't a reason to play Power Strength on Nyx. You know, it's one thing if there's already some logic behind it. Like on Mirage, you get more damage out of the clones, you get more damage out of the Prism. But, you know, on Nyx people were running Overextended, and that just suddenly became kind of an unusable build. So, you know, but there's a lot of arguments behind wanting to go for Intensify, specifically on builds where Intensify gets you some benefit, like 100% armor shred, or 95% damage reduction, or 75% damage reduction for Blessing on Trinity, or things like that, you know. Anyways, we got Prime Continuity here to somewhat negate the minus duration on Fleeting Expertise, and this is a pretty low-ranked Fleeting Expertise, so we're still getting a bit extra duration out of Continuity, but not a whole lot. As you can see, the duration on this build isn't great, and we're going to have to spam the Eclipse and the Hollow Mirrors to make sure that they're constantly on, but the cost is very low. The cost is only going to be about 10 energy, and that's going to be fine. Last but not least, Stretch. Bigger Prism, bigger range on Ledger Domain. I used to be running the other build I've done on Mirage before that I think is pretty funny is actually going for the Augment Explosion build and going for an overextended run on that, just because you can get something like 80, 90 meters on Legend Domain by doing that. 100 actually on that particular build I'm running here. And so not only does it turn the entire map into a pile of booby traps that will kill enemies from completely off screen, completely off the map and whatnot, just as they spawn in, they'll get nommed by a locker. But it also lets you essentially convert all explosives, all ammo, and all energy orbs and everything on the entire map into landmines that will slow enemies down, proc fire, proc cold. Usually those are the two main ones you'll see especially if you're running a Necros, making much of health orbs, you'll get tons of fire procs on those mines, and you can essentially lag out the game if you aren't careful with this setup, because you'll be making so much of the map and spawning so many units in to just fight enemies for you. Enemies won't hardly get close to you with a build like this. Anyways, I'm not going to really talk too much about the philosophy of those other two builds. Those are more just theory crafting things. I usually prefer to just play my Mirage with this balanced build here, just because it works for setting up Eclipse, because Eclipse has the Intensify to give you damage reduction when you are in Shadow, and it's a pretty good Prism on top of that, and you can use all of Mirage's abilities without having to worry about some of them being useless due to, say, narrow-minded. So I always feel like that's the way I like to play her. And I think that that's also a good... it's a good build philosophy to think about as well, that you don't necessarily have to go with anything fancy to be able to enjoy a Warframe, you know? There's the Total Eclipse augment here, there's all these augments that you can be slapping onto the Warframe, but honestly, none of these necessarily changes the functionality of what Mirage does. Explosive is the one that changes the functionality the most, and even then it's not that fantastic. The other two are kind of just min-maxing and being able to help out your squad the most. And honestly, I would rather just have my Mirage be balanced, be effective, and have the 3 defensive mods here: Quick Thinking, Prime Flow, Vitality. Have those set up. Also Handspray, of course. Also have the Handspray to be able to recover from knockdowns faster. I didn't mention Handspray, I didn't mention Corrosive Protection, but those are pretty generic things. And I'd rather just have a Mirage that's able to use all of her abilities and able to be survivable in that kind of scenario. She's just a very good Warframe at putting out DPS. And that's important. Now, my Telos Akbolto here, I'm not exactly sure how to describe him, other than that this Riven here, I have a couple of Akbolto Rivens. I've been trying to roll them into... I've been trying to roll my Akbolto Rivens into something for the Akbolto Prime and something for the Telos Akbolto, just because this weapon is definitely much more of a status-based weapon, but as opposed to the Akbolto Prime, which is very much a crit weapon. But for the time being, I'm just running this for some bonus electricity damage. It's nothing really good just because of the critical chance on it. I've been trying to come up with a Riven that's more along the lines of a bonus base damage and maybe some fire rate or some status chance or something like that, you know. Punch 3 even, something that I could use in the Telos Akbolto. Anyways, this has only got one forma on it, just the either a V or a dash, whichever one of these I need to add in. Obviously I would not have added a D polarity at the beginning by myself, just because, well, if you look at pistols, there are literally 2 mods that have D polarities, with the exception of potentially Rivens, but I don't even have that, so yeah, it's not particularly useful. Anyways, Hornet Strike, a couple of the multi-shot mods, and some status mods, some dual stat mods here, Corrosive being the important one. You know, generic build there. The Telos Akbolto has a decent amount of punch to it in terms of raw DPS. It's not a fantastic weapon, neither does the Prisma Skana. This thing I haven't formed out yet just because I'm waiting to get hold of the new Loka augment that gives it more raw damage output. Something like plus 100% melee damage stacked with Prime Pressure Point, you know. Something like that is what it does. And once I get hold of that, then this weapon becomes worth using. Swords in general aren't balanced very well. As you can see, this is not a max out build by any means, but even so, the raw damage, the raw base damage on the Skana, the Prisma Skana, and it's a Prisma weapon too, which means I had to go out of my way to get hold of it, and it's still only putting out something like 35 damage, base damage. Now, where this does become useful is actually as a shell for some other Exalted weapons that still inherit melee weapon mods, because there's a few of those still out there. Things like the Atlas Punch or the Gara's Gara's whatever that Shattered Lance is, and Korra still has her whip inherent melee mods. There's a few of them out there, and being able to set up a Prisma Skana with things like the New Look Augment and maybe a Riven mod on top of it as well that are all going to get inherited by those semi-exalted abilities, even though there's not a, even though there might not be an exalted weapon attached to it. Still an interesting thing, but we're just going to have to run with the Skana. Swords in general just don't deal very much damage. I'm sorry to say it. You can get them to the point with mods like Condition Overload where they're able to put up relevant damage, but the fact that they have a short range, yes, fast attack animations, but ultimately nothing particularly good in terms of raw damage, and they'll only be hitting one enemy at a time. The overall DPS is just so much lower compared to weapons like polearms, like heavy weapons, like even things like dual swords with crit builds. There's a lot of other ways you can go about getting a weapon to deal good damage output, and I do feel like if I was to actually set this weapon up to be dealing some DPS, I would have to rely on that 20% crit chance there to be able to actually get some raw damage out of it, because it does attack relatively fast. Anyways, the last part of this build is going to end up being Moa. Yay, Moa. I am about to build a second Moa so I can swap off my anti-grav grenade into presumably something slightly more useful for a Moa precept. I'm thinking the Stomp actually is what I'm going to try and add to my Moas so that I can have them suck in enemies and stomp them down to knock them down. That would be probably the most useful precepts you could add to these things. Anyways, other thing I'm trying to decide is whether this is going to be the Moa that I'm going to rely on for having the most raw stats, or whether there's going to be a different one. Anyways, so we got Link Shields, Link Armor, Link Health, Medikit. This is a very tanky Moa. I would probably swap the Link Shields into something like Sanctuary if I was to put more form into this. Then Vacuum, Guardian, Med-Array, Animal Instinct, all that good stuff. And of course the precepts for the Moa. Basically, all we've got going here is a very generic build, Vacuum, Animal Instinct, all the normal stuff, but a very tanky unit spotting in those abilities, as opposed to your usual Sentinels, which rely on being unobtrusive. And of course, Scenery, because we are Mirage and we need Energy Regen. I'm just going to leave it on that. And let's go run this. What is this? Extreme Cold Sabotage. Well, okay. Well, Sabotage is typically not too bad, especially because this appears to be planetary sabotage, so the objective is going to be one of the older objectives, actually, where you're destroying a reactor. That should be easy enough. And Mirage has the passive where she's able to perform things like rolls and jumps faster, which is good because
watch out for enemy patrols.
Running appears to be a thing that we're not going to get the opportunity to do here.
Deliver the payload.
Yeah, as you can see though, Eclipse, like, the biggest thing about Eclipse is that there was some changes made to it a while back where it became it was supposed to be made more consistent, but in my opinion it's actually been made less consistent. Is that reducing my reload speed as well? Oh, that's terrifyingly annoying to deal with. As you can see, even while we're standing in the shadows here, there it finally swapped over to the night form for a second. But now we're in the shadows and it's going for day and bonus damage. Like, it's a very inconsistent ability and as a whole. And it was made less consistent with the changes to it rather than more. Also, I really don't want to walk through these landmines if I can help it. Like, it looks like I'm not going to be able to help it, but you know. No, I don't want a Bursa. Oh, that's not a Bursa. That is a, what's his bucket? As you can see, this is a weapon that I just pull out for, this weapon right here, the Amprex, I tend to pull out for sorties all the time. It's one of the most powerful weapons in my arsenal. So I guess I might as well show off the Akboltos for a little bit. As you can see, even though these aren't the Akbolto Prime, they aren't the extremely high DPS crit weapon. Wow, that reload takes a long time with this modifier. Let's draw some of those blinds. Alright, fine. If y'all insist, you'll get a prism. Man, the reduced casting speed and the reduced reload speed, that's just very annoying to have to deal with. What a modifier. It's not making the mission particularly difficult. Like, these enemies are feeling extremely squishy. As you can see, like, even the Telos Akbolto, it does a lot of raw DPS, and we're hitting 100% status chance here too, so we're proccing all the status effects you could ever need. Duration on the Hollow Mirrors, whatnot, it's still getting 30 seconds out of it, and that's the important thing. No, Moa. Whatever, I'm not worried about it. I am not worried about Moa. Look how long that takes to channel, though. One of the other things that you'll see people run a Mirage sometimes, if they're going to go for a build that's more focused on spamming prisons, is you're going to see them run Natural Talent, because the ability already has a very long channeling duration on it, just to cast the ability in the first place. Ow! I didn't realize he was going to drop that right then, or I wouldn't have tried to spam the sleight of hand. Anyways, oh, we got some kind of Xmas that's taking 0 damage from those. That's awkward. As you can see, you can detonate the mines, but you have to have a projectile-style weapon. I'm actually going to sit here and let's regenerate some energy too. Well, the fact that Hollow Mirrors does that. Among the effects on it being the ability to set up some of those Corpus tiles with laser traps that generate energy for you. That's always cute. Just channel that, send it over the map, see if I can clear out some of those flying ospreys and whatnot. Oh, I canceled the reload animation like an idiot. One important thing to realize too is that you can recast Eclipse while active as many times as you need to. So that's one of the important things to recognize about this build, is that because it's efficient, because it's got a lot of power efficiency, I technically don't have to have any downtime on Eclipse because I can spam it if need be. I've just been not doing so because of the cast animations here being slowed down pretty horribly by the modifier. And I would really like it if there were not 20 jillion mines here. Oh god. One of the things I've been considering too is getting hold of... did I just kill that with a Syndicate proc? I did just kill that with the Truth proc. Huh. Well, that was interesting, being able to take out an interjector with that. You don't see that very often. Anyways. Yeah, one of the weaknesses of the way this is currently set up on this build is that because I'm running Handspree in the Exo slot, I'm not running Pain Threshold. And on a lot of squishier style quick thinking frames like this, I would prefer to run Pain Threshold just so I can't be stagger locked. But that just kind of isn't an option for the time being. And I really wish the Amprex was able to detonate these mines. Apparently it is not able to detonate these landmines, which is a bit of a problem. Still though. Still quite a powerful weapon, as you can see. The Amprex is definitely something that you should consider adding to your inventories if possible. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, the sleight of hand turning control consoles into things that taunt enemies when they're walking towards them. That even applies to enemies that physically can't hack control consoles. See, there's the Corpus Tech doing that as well. As you can see here, we got a pretty decent coverage on Prism. So, like, I feel like the balance build on Mirage is pretty excellent. You're able to get a pretty... You're able to spam that Prism without too much fear, and as you can see, the energy drain is very manageable here. The only real downside is just having to spam the Hollow Mirrors and the Eclipse once every 30 seconds, but even then, 30 seconds is not too crazy of an amount of time. Also, I got a crit there, so that actually was able to kill some of those Ospreys, but I mean, Prisma Skana, nothing too impressive. Alrighty, well that was an incredibly fast mission. I kind of just got to sit here and chat about things rather than actually doing any particularly nasty challenges. But I mean, the Amprex is a disgustingly powerful weapon, so yeah, get a hold of one. It takes a lot of forma to turn it into the powerhouse that you see there, because that build I was running was using 5 polarities, including a ribbon. But I mean, it's a very powerful weapon, very good at cleaving through trash enemies like all those Ospreys. So, anyways, that's it. It was a very fast mission, but hey, I mean, sometimes they gotta be, right? And these always take too long to record in the first place. Next one's gonna be Interception. I am so happy I didn't have to run that by myself. Herbs are back.